Hi everyone, I keep making buggy from GTA 5. A test for frame rigidity goes first. The frame is not rigid enough, but I make it in concordance with a 3D game model. It won't be difficult to strengthen it by adding a pair of 10-meter long pipes to the construction. In the previous part we welded the frame, installed the suspension and made the banded steel wheels. In this part I'm gonna install a control and a brake system. I'll start with the steering system. At first I wanted to place a steering rack, but since the donor got a steering linkage, we'll try to install it. Moreover, I've never worked with such steering device. It looks rather difficult, and you need to add a steering gearbox to the construction. There's a second version with a steering rack for comparison. We just need to find a rack of the right size and install it into the buggy. It'll be much easier to implement. I want to leave the rail as a customizing element, but for now I'll install a linkage with a gearbox. Feels like this won't be so easy to do. As I said in the previous part, the linkage will be installed not from the front but at the back. For this purpose, I turned over the steering knuckles in order the steering knuckle arms looked back. It's inconvenient that the tie rods have a bend. It'd be easier to work with the straight ones. They were immediately swapped. The steering gear should be also turned over, otherwise there'll be a reversal control. If you turn the steering wheel right, then the wheels will turn left. The splines have a cone and the pitman arm will have to be turned. I tack welded it for now. The steering gearbox mount to the frame was made from a metal bracket. I welded another tube for the bracket into the bottom of the frame and approximately set the height for the steering gearbox. First problem is the tie rod, which abuts on the adjusting bolt of the gearbox and also touches the frame. I tried to lengthen the steering knuckle arm for 5 mm and cut the frame pipe. Now there's a small gap everywhere. But I was so keen about the process that I forgot the most important thing. The hinges of the suspension arms and of the tie rods should stay on the same line. Otherwise, as you can see, the wheels are having life of their own while the suspension working process. So we need to find the right angle. A-shaped arms would make it much easier. The hinge should be placed in line with the silent blocks. With this type of suspension, I don't even know in what position to put the steering link. At the donor it stood at the front, somewhere about this position. The correct location of the tie rod is gonna be determined through trial and error. I started experimenting on the right side and finally found the right position. The inner hinge of the tie rod should be placed on the same axis with the ball socket of the steering knuckles. This is the only position when the wheels remain in place during the suspension work. Now we can put the steering gearbox into the same position. The frame legs will impair the working process, so they were immediately cut off the frame. Most likely they'll need to be moved elsewhere. In this position the tie rod bend will serve as a check too. For the sake of experiment, I'll move it to another place. Now is the right side. I also cut off the frame leg and began to install an idler arm in its place. I attached it quite rudely on tack welds for now, because I've got fears that I'd have to redo everything again. Seems like everything is screwed into its place. Now we need to make testings. Of course, it's not yet clear how the whole construction will behave while the buggy movement, but this is what this experiment is made for. I also decided to swap the center link over the tie rod. That's why the link had to be slightly shortened. In this position, the standard tie rod ceased to touch the steering gearbox. I put on a steering tube over the gearbox and checked the linkage work. Now we can finalize the draft version of the linkage attachment. Summarizing the results, everything looks simple. We just need to cut off the frame legs and shorten the center link, as well as place the hinges along the axis of the steering knuckles. Yet it took me a very long time. Then I'll install the steering column. First, the shaft needs to be lengthened. Secondly, we need to add 2 universal joints to it. The steering rack will be attached to the frame with a U-shaped bracket. After that, I cut off this part of the shaft and extended it with pipe. Looks good so far. The particulars are gonna be clarified only after running test. Next, I want to fix a driver's seat. It'll be attached with some small metal brackets. I decided to keep the default sledge runners to save the adjustment. I welded the bracket on tack welds on purpose, in order to correct the seat's position after its setting. Now we move on to the foot pedal adjustment. While sitting on a seat with a board under my feet, I found a convenient position of pedals. The brake cylinders and the pedals will be used from the same donor car. I'll make a platform for the clutch and brake pedals from a metal slab. I temporarily welded the platform to the frame to find a comfortable pedal position. The toe bearing was made of steel slab. I didn't like the position of the clutch pedal, so I decided to bend it in other direction. Now it has become convenient. After finding a good location of the pedals, I finally welded the platform to the body. I welded another tube to the frame and placed a gas pedal on it. The pedals are in place now, which means it's possible to run the brake lines. First I joined the front brakes. Then the rear ones. I didn't manage to find the rubber pipes with such kind of thread, so I took those adapters. The right and the left sides were linked with a T-joint. To connect the T-joint and the brake cylinder, you also need an adapter and a brake pipe. It only remains to connect the brake fluid tank with hoses and we can finally bleed the brakes. Since I swapped the steering knuckles, the bleeder screws turned out to be below. In order to normally deflate the brake cylinders, I turned over the steering knuckle with the bleeder screws being up. The front brakes got well deflated, and the brake pads in them were good conditioned. Yet the rear brakes didn't want to get bled. It seems like all the air came out, but the rear wheels refused to brake. I decided to check how the brake pads were doing, and to my surprise didn't find them in their slot. It's not easy to get the original brake pads nowadays. Still, this is what I came up with. There are pads which are similar in diameter from another car model. We only need to finalize the mount. After some rework, I put the pads in their place, fitted in as a native. I also decided to see how things were going on the left side. The pads need to be replaced. The brakes work well, but you also need to check the brakes operation in motion. I also wanted to install the handbrake for the ease of convenience, so that the buggy would not slide down anywhere. I took the cables for the handbrake. The holes will have to be widened a bit. We also need to re-weld the platform for fixing the tube guide cable. Using a sharpened bolt, I increased the hole in the lug and installed the cable in its place. I also made a platform to another end of the cable for fixing the tube guide cable and took that cable equalizer. The platform for the handbrake has been fixed in this place so far. After installing the gear lever, we'll probably have to remove it. The handbrake is on the side, as is the entire brake system. The clutch pedal, as well as the gas pedal, will be connected in the next part when I start installing the engine. Thanks everyone for your support and attention. If you like this video, put your thumb up. See you in the next part.